You saw right, we're doing this for real. The Dungeons & Dragons Iceberg, a monolithic list containing the surface level ideas that everyone knows about the game, down to the most obscure facts that even the most seasoned of players may never have even heard of, much less understand. So, naturally, we begin with the first layer, the Gelatinous Cube. Layer 1 topics are very basic, like we begin with DM. This term stands for Dungeon Master. It's the person behind the screen that describes the world, the NPCs, and most importantly, they decide if your long rest goes through alright or not, or if you're gonna get woken up by on-kegs. Again. Many dice. Another easy one. There are many dice. 7 in a set to be specific. There are Ds 4, 6, 8, 2 10s, 12, and 20. Each is used to do different things, and if you want to know more about these dice, click up there to watch our video describing what each of them do. Alright, next topic, the Satanic Panic. This refers to a period of time in the 80s when everyone just went crazy. I mean, they thought that metal music was the sound of the armies of hell, and as such, they thought that D&D, a game where you can use magic powers to fight fantasy monsters, was satanic, and they tried to get it banned. Glad that's over. Right? Stranger Things. I mean, come on. It's Stranger Things. They have D&D in it, and it's got a lot of the names and ideas taken from early forms of D&D, like the Demogorgon or the Mind Flayer. It's all... come on. Community. Again. Come on. Though I guess this one is a little bit more obscure, but yeah, they played D&D on Community. That's about it. E.T. Okay, another strange, to some kind of obvious one. In the back of one of the scenes in E.T., it looks like they were playing D&D on a table. Yeah. Stephen Colbert. On the last few Red Nose Days, a day where people can fundraise to try and end the cycle of child poverty, Stephen Colbert has played D&D, usually with Matt Mercer. The games are a little bit stilted, a little bit odd, clumsy, but it's to be expected when there's just one inexperienced player with no one to bounce off of. I believe on the most recent one there were a couple of other players, but yeah, that one-on-one. Ooh. And lastly for the first layer, Vin Diesel, the short king of the Fast and Furious movies, who's too much of a sissy to let The Rock share his spotlight, has a claim to fame as being the reason behind the Bloodhunter class. As a promotion for his film The Last Witch Hunter, he played some D&D with Matt Mercer, and after that game, using some of the things made for that game, Matt would compile together the Bloodhunter class that we know and love today. Alright, second layer, the Ogre. At this point, we're past the things that everyone knows, and we're getting to the things that everyone who's in the community is aware of. We begin with Gary Gygax, the man who started it all, with his friends, building off of an existing system that he helped make years previously, and with the backing of a company that he founded with another friend. He made D&D. He was very influential. He did a lot in his life, and he was largely responsible for many of the things that we love today about Dungeons & Dragons. WotC, or Wizards of the Coast, the company that now owns D&D, which is itself a subsidiary of Hasbro. You know Hasbro. They own G.I. Joe and Transformers. Fundamental to video games. Yeah, I guess, I don't know. A lot of people say that D&D, with its influence on a generation of future game designers and the ways that it allowed for a lot of free thinking and reinterpretation of its rules, formed the modern video game industry, or at least the RPG side of it. The systems and structures originally seen in D&D can be seen in the fundamental DNA of many of the early RPGs like Fallout, and even in more modern games that have stat, progression, leveling systems and stuff that could have been seen to have come from D&D. 5e. D&D has been segmented into different editions over the years. Each big release comes with it an assortment of source books, adventures, and supplements. 5e is the latest of these editions. There have been many different versions. There's 1e, there's AD&D, and D&D Basic, 2nd edition Advanced, 3rd, 3.5, 4th, and probably a whole bunch others that I'm forgetting. But yeah, 5e, that's the modern one, that's the current one. And yeah, they were gonna try for a minute there to do something different, and then we just roped it back in, and they're like, nah, it's just an alternate rule set for 5e now. We saw what you tried to do. Works fine. We don't want another 4E. Miniatures. To play D&D, miniatures, minis, kind of a must. D&D started as chainmail, which we'll get more into later, and that was a war game, a game with no story, just big battles and rolling dice. So from that, they added the role-playing on. The combat stayed more or less the same, but yeah, now there's role-playing. So, to do combat, you have to know where the enemies are, how far you are from them, if you can see them easily, or if you have to get somewhere else to get a better shot or get closer to them. And to do that, you should use minis, because that's kind of the best way to figure out where everything is. If you just physically look at it, it works. You could alternatively do theater of the mind, which means that you imagine the locations of everyone, but this risks multiple people having multiple different images of the battle, and more on that, it's very hard for new DMs to wrangle everyone's thoughts towards one amalgamated battlefield, rather than everyone's just going to be straying every direction. The Forgotten Realms. This refers to the world of Faerun, or more specifically Toril, with Faerun on it, and many of its alternative planes, such as the Shadowfell or the Feywild or whatever. The Forgotten Realms is where most of the pre-written books take place, where the stories of Bruenor, Drizz't, and all of the others inhabit. It is a pretty typical fantasy world inspired by Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, and it evolved over generations of play into what it is today. Neverwinter is a city on Faerun, the central world in the Forgotten Realms, as I said above. It's also an MMORPG, as well as a few other things. But the city is the main one that comes to mind for this level of understanding on the Iceberg, and so I'm saying that this entry simply means Neverwinter, the city. The city of Neverwinter is famed throughout the realms. It is host to many grand events and many things. A whole bunch of adventures take place there. Neverwinter is where the most recent D&D movie took place. It's just kind of like this big central hub for a lot of things that many adventures take place in. Critical Role. If you're here, you know. Adventurers League. This refers to the large official gatherings of D&D players. They get together into tables and play games run as written. They're organized at local game shops and staffed by fans of the game. These adventures do not do a whole lot of RP, they mostly focus on the combat and the story. It's more like playing an MMORPG, where you make a character, do the quests, and then talk about it later at the bar. Tiamat, the infernal dragon queen herself. Bearing 5 heads, one for each of the chromatic colors red, blue, green, white, and black, she is locked in the first layer of Hell Avernus for so many reasons. The least of which is defying Asmodeus and attempting to elevate herself to the status of a god, which she has done multiple times before rapidly losing that power again. She is crazy dangerous to fight, and if you're ever in the firing range of one of her breath attacks, it might already be too late. D&D Movie. There were 3 D&D movies released before the modern incarnation. These films were of varying levels of quality, and 2 of the 3 went direct to DVD. However, for any fan of the game, they're a fun little thing to reminisce about, because now we actually have a good live-action D&D movie to watch, which means that we no longer need those, and they can just be fun little relics of the past. Dark Alliance. Alright, the last thing in the second layer. It's another D&D video game. This time released in 2021, Dark Alliance is a game where you and a group of friends can play in a world and with a combat system inspired by D&D, the tabletop game. It has mixed reviews on Steam, and I've never played it. Just play Baldur's Gate 3 if you want to play a D&D video game, honestly, just do that. Layer 3, the Night Hag. Alright, for this layer, the topics are only known to those who've been playing this game for a while, and almost nothing down here is known to the layman. We begin with TSR. This is the company co-founded by Gary Gygax, where Chainmail and the first few editions of D&D were published. Eventually they would be bought by Wizards of the Coast in the 90s, and they would in turn be bought by Hasbro in 99. Pathfinder. It's a game very similar to D&D. It was first published in 2009 and has continued to receive updates, new books, and new editions, much like how D&D does. It is far more complicated in its current version than D&D 5e, but it has its own fans who love it for the freedom and choice that you get. The number of options are a lot greater than 5e. 5e Tools. It's a good website that can act as a resource for finding all sorts of information fast and reliably for the most recent edition of the game. Here's the link. That guy, or the rules lawyer, are player archetypes that you do not ever want to be. Rules lawyers are people who've read the books too much and insist on playing the game as if it were a strict series of laws, and not as if it were a role-playing game where sometimes it's better to just play for fun and not to win. That guy tends to be the one who points out all the issues in either the story or in the player's logic and doesn't just let things go. So yeah, don't be either of these people. The Bag of Black Hole is a crazy rule, not exactly exploit, more like consequence, where if you place one interdimensional space into another, you suck everyone and everything nearby into the astral plane. This can be used as a weapon in a number of ways. One is to have two mage hands place one bag of holding into another right next to a sleeping dragon, while the party hides safely behind a wall. But, that probably won't save you. Returning to something I mentioned earlier, Drizz't, Vecna, and Lolth, these are all characters seen across the realms. Drizz't is an adventurer, Vecna is the god of liches, and Lolth is the demon queen of spiders. I believe this entry exists merely to say that there are some characters that extend beyond their base world and can be seen across the multiverse. Drizz't has been known to realms hop, Vecna is a god and exists at all places, and Lolth likes to dig her little claws into whatever she can. Arkhan steals the hand of Vecna. Spoilers for Critical Role Campaign 1. Okay, you skipped? Cool. So Vecna, see above, has a few magic items associated with themselves, namely their hand and their eye. A creature who finds these items can remove their own hand or eye and replace them with these cursed things to gain magic powers in exchange for certain costs. Arkhan was a character played by Joe Manganiello, Flash Thompson in the original Spider-Man movies. He was in Critical Role. Yeah, he was in their first campaign. He was there. Look at the dude. And his character, Arkhan, when given the option to take on the hand for himself, yeah, it was through rather illicit means. He literally stole it. It's in the name. He did it. And he used it. Okay, now we're done with spoilers. Infinity Engine and NN. These refer to an isometric game engine, the Infinity Engine, and Neverwinter Nights, an isometric D&D game built in the Infinity Engine. The engine was developed in the late 90s for Baldur's Gate, the first one, and then updated and reworked to play a large series of games, including Neverwinter Nights. I roll to seduce the dragon. Good luck with that. Tomb of Horrors. This refers to a terrible plan by Big Papa Gary Gygax to beat invincible characters and thwart crappy players. He made a dungeon, one so convoluted and so illogical that not by virtue of it being hard, but rather by it being so mentally challenging on the player that it would encourage those players to think smarter and not play harder. In reality though, it just made people who played the dungeon hate the game. If you want to see a more in-depth breakdown on the Tomb of Horrors, please go and check out XP to Level 3's video. There's two. I'll have them linked down in the description below. Sir Bearington refers to a green text story where a bear becomes awakened, meaning it gains consciousness and can think and act like a human, and then it becomes a rogue. And then after an in-universe time skip of like a year or something, a gentleman of upper society he becomes. He wears bear-sized suits and a monocle. He is very good at lying and disguises because rogue, but every so often, one person sees through his disguise and is removed from the premises, freaking out that there's a bear there. But no one else knows what he's talking about. That's just Sir Bearington. Ed Greenwood was the original creator of the Forgotten Realms world. See that? He made that. Are you sure refers to the last thing that most DMs say right before disaster strikes. It's the thing we want to say to warn you, and you never listen. D&D Animated Show. It's the thing that gave us this guy, which then evolved into this. So thanks. In reality though, it was a show that brought a lot of people into the game, and then those people would later go to work on the game itself for Wizards of the Coast. It was pretty okay from what I remember from watching it when I was younger. I can't say that I've watched it recently. I don't think I want to. Sigil is the center, reportedly existing in the middle of the multiverse. It's right there, in the middle. The red box refers to this thing, the thing you're thinking of when you think of early days D&D. But it wasn't actually the first box. This was. That's it. Centaur Stacking. Oh boy. Centaurs have a rule, or at least they did in the Unearthed Arcana original release. I don't know if they still do. I'm still going on memory for all these. They have a rule that lets them allow a medium or smaller creature to ride them. Centaurs, at least the player races, are medium. So centaurs can ride each other. And because one centaur can stack on another, and then another centaur can stack on them, they can just keep going. Forever. Nah, I'm just joking. That was ruled out by Jeremy Crawford, the official, paid, rules lawyer for the game. He's the one guy who can do it and no one gets mad. I cast Fireball / Eldritch Blast. It's a joke, that's what it is. It's funny because that's all wizards and warlocks do. And now that I've explained the joke, it's no longer funny. Turn Undead is an ability that clerics get. When they use it and undead near them fail a saving throw, they are forced to run away. That's kind of it. Tarrasque Karaoke, the end of Layer 3. What could this possibly mean? Oh, this entry just refers to Fool's Gold, a Dingo Doodles story series on YouTube. It later got its own Kickstarter. And here I thought it would be about singing Tarrasques. How lame. When you reach Layer 4, the Skeleton King, you're beyond almost everyone. After the first few items in this layer, I actually had to start researching. That's how in-depth we're getting here. We begin with Spelljammer, the sci-fi fantasy space-based D&D campaign setting. Originally released for 2nd edition in 1989, this just finally got re-released back in 2022, and thus has become a whole lot more well-known than this spot on the iceberg would lead you to believe. It is also very similar to my homebrewed world that you can watch weekly in Icarius, the Black Between the Stars. Chainmail, mentioned above, is the original system that would eventually lead to Dungeons and Dragons. It was a war game, one where the only thing that mattered was fighting. Large-scale battles, small-scale ones. The mental image of combat was the goal for Chainmail. The City of Brass is the largest city on the elemental plane of fire. It's a cool place to visit in what's an otherwise barren and desolate lava field full of nothing but death and destruction. DM's Guild is a website where players can buy and sell homebrew content through a unified platform. You can find lots of free stuff on there too. It's fine. Wizards takes a big cut though, so you should just support our Patreon instead. That way you get homebrew and I get a bigger cut. Win-win. Alright, now it's completely lost me. Now I actually have to start looking these up. Pun Pun is a character built all around being insanely broken, also known as way too powerful. It's a power gaming build, that's all it is. It's a stupid little thing that makes a character really strong, and that's about it. It's not really that interesting. It originally came out for 3.5, and then someone stumbled into how to do it in 5e on accident. Look it up if you're interested, I've got some links down below. Burk refers to a way of speaking that rhymes with words that you actually want to say. So apples and pears, stairs. Butcher's hook, look. Berkshire Hunt. Okay, next. Thanks, Iceberg. You almost got me cancelled. Okay. The Dread Gazebo. This is what happens when a DM overemphasizes something, making a player suspicious that it secretly spells their doom. So, there's a gazebo on a hill. A low level of fog rolls down across the grass, and a single light flickers in the otherwise dark windowed building. Yeah, there's a monster in there. For sure. Of course. No questions. We have to kill everyone inside. Half Orca refers to when you can't read, and you mistake half orc for half orca, and then when you get to your first game, you think you're playing a half whale when you're just a big green dude. Mazes and Monsters refers to a 1982 movie inspired by D&D featuring Tom Hanks as the lead character. It's just an old movie and it clearly rips off D&D without giving credit, and that's about it. Kobold Press is a company that makes tons of things for D&D. Supplements, guides, adventures. But it's just a company, and there's not really much more to see here. They make some okay stuff. I see some solid reviews. I've never bought anything from them, but you know what? They made it on the D&D Iceberg, apparently. The Trove was, and kind of still is, a piracy-based website all about collecting PDFs of the D&D books. It's a crime thing. But why do this when you can just use Wikidot and 5e tools? Like, seriously. Those are there and those are open source. You don't need PDFs of the books. The All-Barbarian Party is just another joke. It's a thought concept of what happens if everyone plays Barbarians. The answer is some of you will die and the Totem Warrior will teabag your corpses. Libdulpulp, I think I said that right, is the insane god of the Kuatoa, a crazy group of fish people. It's theorized that this god doesn't actually exist and is just a collective figment of the Kuatoa's insane imaginations. The Court of the Modrons refers to the group in control of Mechanus, the plane of machines. They're little metal guys. Some are cute, some are less so. /TG/ refers to the 4chan image board for traditional games. It's where you can post funnies, but it's 4chan. So there's always that one person who makes it weird or illegal. Amy the Asshole, yeah, I can say that one, refers to another green text story about a character named Amy, and she's an asshole. She's kind of a character who would tell a kid the horrors of adventuring, make the kid cry and run home. Her party calls her an ass, and that's about it. That's the end of the day. That's Amy the Asshole. The name is based off the Am I the Asshole subreddit, and yep. Joke ruined because I explained it. Satan. It's Satan. It could be referring to D&D's connection to the Satanic Panic, or how Satan could be seen in multiple aspects of the game, whether it's Asmodeus or the gnawing mouths of the Demogorgon. But yeah, Satan is kind of a big part of the game, regardless of if he ever actually makes an appearance. So I think that's why this is here. Ogloff refers to a very NSFW website where there are lots of D&D comics and other sorts of things, but they are not in the majority. There are very few SFW comics. Yeah, it's just a comic website, one you don't need to go to. Al-Qadim, the last entry in this layer, refers to an Arabian Nights themed campaign setting released for 3.5. It wasn't as bad as the Oriental expansion. Yep. That's real. It has new subclasses, races, and monsters. Yeah, Al-Qadim was a game expansion. It's about it. For Layer 5, the Xanathar, we begin with the Luminous Being. The Luminous Being is an extra-dimensional being existing at all points in time and space. They are not bound by the multiverse, its borders, its laws, none of it. And they are responsible for the creation and destruction of all universes and gods. It's not directly stated anywhere, but this is probably just a way to factor the DM into the universe. I don't know why you'd need to do that, but the Luminous Being has DM powers. So let's just say that they're an in-universe version of the DM. Ahriman is from Pathfinder, and is the embodiment of pure destruction. He is the lord of all the divs, which are a race of fiends, and he commands fear in the hearts of all who look upon him. Alternatively, in reference to D&D, not Pathfinder, Ahrimanes is the demon lord in charge of the 452nd layer of the Abyss. He is the patron of exiles and wanderers. Either way, I have no idea why this is on the iceberg. Obiriths were a race of demons that predated mortal life. They ruin even the gods. They drive people mad with their appearances, and they're just a really cool thing that has not been brought into 5e. I don't know why. The last edition they were in was like second. These guys are cool. Put them in. That Guy Destroys Psionics refers to another green text story. This time one where the characters systematically disable and destroy links to the plane of force, and eventually stop all psionics from functioning by completely severing it. It's a strangely written story, one that honestly sounds kind of angrily written, but oh well, it worked out for them in the end. Fel could be referring to the Feywild / Shadow Fel, or it could be referring to the barbarians that regularly fall from space and survive, just because they can. If it's the first thing, the Feywild and the Shadowfell are realms consisting of magical creatures and locations, very disconnected in logic from the material plane. The Shadowfell is one of permanent night and creatures warped by the darkness, and the Feywild is a realm of pure wild, untamed flora and fauna, unmitigated emotions and colors and life. And if it's the second, the Barbarians, we just gotta stop casting fly on those guys, because they're just abusing that shit. The Henderson Scale does not, in fact, refer to Dustin Henderson, but instead to a scale of just how far individual actions derail role-playing games. So a character wanting to investigate a dead end is a minor blip on the scale, but another character killing the king instead of doing what he asked and paid for, that's off the charts. Crystal spheres are the huge shells that contain the planetary systems. For some reason, empty space is just not allowed in D&D, and actually there are giant glass spheres holding it all together. I don't know why, I'm just reading the iceberg, so sue me. Sequel films refers to something we already talked about, the 2 follow-up movies to the original 2000 film. They went straight to D&D, and so not many people know about them, but yeah. Sequel films. They exist. The Great Mother refers to the matron of all beholders, not because that is their gender or their familiar role, but you know what? Okay, let's have a couple-minute diatribe on beholders, because they're weird. Beholders. They dream new beholders into existence. They do so accidentally, and when this new beholder becomes real, they typically try to kill or do succeed in killing the one who made them. So the matron is the first beholder to make another, and not actually a female head of the family, which then leads on to the question, where did they come from? No one knows. That's the answer. The answer is no one knows. They just float around in the abyss, making more beholders and kicking them out into realms all over. That's just their thing, that they're just there. Fatal stands for the fantasy adventure to adult lechery, or from another time, another land. I like the second one better, but whatever. And this is a tabletop role-playing game focused on dark fantasy, graphic violence, and yep, very, very sexualized content. It's grown-up D&D, or D&D for people who really, they just want it, they have something wrong, they need to get weird with each other after the game. We don't need to talk about this anymore. The Book of Vile Darkness refers to the dreaded tome which corrupts all who read it. The first copy was written by Vecna, see above, and was to act as a sort of reference manual. However, someone stole it, made some copies, made some alterations, and this just kept happening. We'll take it, write it, copy it, move on, move on. It's written in a bunch of different scripts. The book has started to fall apart in places and been restitched with flesh and bone. Nowadays, if you get a copy of the book and you read it, you're gonna go mad, become evil, and gain all sorts of magic powers. Very cool, I want one. And the last entry on this layer, another weird and dark one. Stalking a normal girl. See the dread gazebo from above. Stalking a normal girl happens when a DM describes a character too hard, and so the players just follow them around. And sometimes that character is a young girl. And now there's 6 middle-aged dudes just kind of following her around all day. And now you see the problem here. Layer 6, Tiamat. Kicking this one off is the Curse of the Mithranor. Mithranor is a city, or should I say was. It was once the Jewel of Cormanthyr, but now after a war known as the Weeping War finished, it festers as a jumbled mess of fiend-infested ruins. The curse most likely relates to the number of attempts to revive the city and return it to its greatness, but they always fail. Next, the Palace of the Silver Princess. This one was actually really interesting to research. Apparently, in 1980, this adventure, the Palace of the Silver Princess, was written for D&D Basic, which, yeah, that's a whole thing where they made Advanced D&D and Basic D&D. One was for kids, and the other was actually what D&D was. But yeah, for Basic, they made this adventure, wrote and published the whole damn thing. Then, the day of its release, it was recalled, and nearly all the copies were destroyed. At the end of the month, they re-released it. They had changed a whole bunch of stuff and just pushed it back out. Thought, but never confirmed, that this whole thing was done because the book was too provocative, sexual, and or satanic. And considering it was released in 1980, the Satanic Panic was kind of at an all-time high, so yeah, I get it. O means nothing, and it's stupid that they put a single letter on here, thinking I'd know what it meant. I don't know what that means. It just says O. Who is O? What is O? Why is O? Esper Genesis refers to a sci-fi role-playing game built on top of 5e, much like a car. The Gith came from GRR Martin. Oh yeah, the Gith was made by GRR Martin, as in Song of Ice and Fire, Game of Thrones, GRR Martin. He invented the name in a book, and then the D&D broskies just kind of like took it from him and made it into their own thing. They only took the name, though, and that's about it. The Gith did not come from GRR Martin. He invented the word Gith Yankee. GRR Martin, when asked about this, said he doesn't really care that they took the name, because they took the name and made something cool with it. That's all that really matters. Elminster told Ed about FR. That's a weird way to phrase that. But what this is saying is that the character Elminster from the Forgotten Realms told Ed Greenwood, see above, about the Forgotten Realms, and that's how he knew what to write about them. The fictional character came into our world, told a dude about his world, and then left. And that's how we got the world that D&D happens in. I like the theory, but wow, that is a really strange idea. Female treants. The only thing I could find specifically talking about the female treants was that squirrels like to eat and tear away at young female treants as they are like growing and sprouting or whatever, and this helps limit the treant population. Gold Box. This refers to a series of video games, RPGs, based on D&D, or AD&D. They were called Gold Box games because every game made with the engine the Gold Box engine was sold with a gold-colored box. Okay, it's gold. And lastly, for layer 6, Warcraft. I mean, come on, it's Warcraft, one of the most famous video games of all time. Not World of Warcraft, the OG Warcraft. The underlying fantasy parts were inspired by things like D&D. And yeah, Warcraft was invented after D&D. It would then go on to profit and get sequels, and eventually WoW would be born. It's its own thing, but I can see how it will be inspired by D&D and thus related to this iceberg. Layer 7, Vecna. To begin with Layer 7, a layer named after the god of liches, what could we possibly do that would match the scale and gravitas of the name of this layer than with the D&D Stage Musical? Yeah, Broadway did a D&D show. It was called Here There Be Dragons, a new musical quest, and it was on from June to July 2022. It's about what happens when a group of friends that used to play D&D when they were younger, and what they would do with their lives after. Or maybe they wouldn't have to be an after. Next, Bensozia. In the first edition, and only the first edition, she was the consort of Asmodeus, and the Queen of Hell. This character has been lost to time, and forgotten by all but the most devoted of lore fiends. The Dragonstrike VHS. This was an adaptation of a board game released by TSR, and it's kind of an infamously bad movie. It was released in '93, and well, it's kind of all there is to say. You can watch it on YouTube for free. Lastly, for this layer is Bolothemog's True Purpose. Bolothemog is said to be the black between the stars, the watcher from above, and the primal force of pure nothingness. He exists to prevent beings from escaping the multiverse and acts as a guardian for the true reality. It was a complete coincidence that Bolothemog wound up being on this iceberg, and we have a campaign subtitled The Black Between the Stars. Please do not look any closer into this. The final layer is simply referred to as the Eldest. Here there are but 2 entries. First, we have the Wild Space series. Wild space typically refers to the space between worlds in a crystal sphere. See above. But series probably relates to an unreleased video game in a series of action RPGs. And that's all I could find. There was going to be maybe a space D&D game. That's all I could find. So if that's wrong, I'm sorry, leave it in the comments below, but Wild Space series, that's nothing. And lastly, we have the original human creator god. Okay, so this could either be how the Judeo-Christian god factors into D&D lore, or how the human god existed in D&D lore, much like how dwarves, gnomes, and orcs have their own race-specific gods. The first one does not have a whole lot of information. Like, it's along the lines of the Luminous Being for how vague and DM-focused it is. And as for the second, there's actually an interesting little bit of lore there. Very early in the lore of the multiverse. Very early in the lore of the multiverse, right after the creation of the races, the human creator god was killed. And that's all we know. We don't know their name, cause of death, which other deity, or maybe even mortal, did it. All we know is that they were there one day, and they were gone the next. And that's why there's no human patron deity. And that's it, the Dungeons & Dragons Iceberg. Thank you very much for joining me on this grand journey. It took a long time, most of it in writing and research, but I mean, this video has been like really long, and so I thank you for sitting through it. It's been a year, a long, hard, tireless year. But you know what? It's been good. And I'm glad I got to share it with you. Be sure to join us this Sunday for episode 17 of Icarius the Black Between the Stars, and I'll see you guys again next time. Bye!